Today we're talking about the best Sony lenses for wedding photography. I'm Taylor Jackson. I am a wedding and portrait photographer here in Waterloo, Ontario, Canada, just about an hour outside of Toronto. First, I want to say thank you so much to Sony for sponsoring this video, for providing the lenses and the cameras you're going to see throughout this video. I have been shooting Sony cameras as they've kind of been coming out over the years, and the specific camera that we're going to be using within this video is the Sony Alpha 7R4. I took this picture of a horse with it. Thanks for looking at my horse. So as you can see in front of me, most of these lenses are primes, with the exception of this zoom here. What a prime is it is a lens that does not zoom. Typically, they let in more light and they're going to give you a more cinematic look and feel to the final image, and that really shallow depth of field, which I really enjoy aesthetically. Primes are typically a lot lighter than zooms as well, and if you're a wedding photographer, you're out there for 8, 10, 12 hours, it is a little bit of a better experience for you to have smaller equipment out there. Also, as far as documentary coverage goes, when you walk into a room, if you have a big lens like this on your camera, and you've just arrived for the getting ready photos, people are very much going to be aware of your presence and they're going to be maybe a little more tense than they could be. If you arrive and you have something like this lens on your camera body, all of a sudden, they're quickly going to forget that you are there. And I think my #1 goal as a wedding photographer is to get people to a place where they forget that we're actually doing a photo session or that we're taking pictures, and they can just be themselves and live the day. Prime lenses are also typically a little bit better in low light. If you're at a wedding day, chances are most of that day is going to be in lower light environments. And when you're shooting something like the 85 F1.4 G Master, you are able to essentially use that into darkness, especially with the high ISO capabilities of Sony Alpha cameras. So now let's talk about the lenses. First up, I would consider this to be my main lens. It is the 85mm f1.4 G Master. We jokingly call this lens the introvert lens because it gives you a little bit more reach. So something like a 55 or a 50mm lens is typically a more normal focal length. 85 gets into kind of that portrait and a little bit more into the telephoto space. The reason I like that is because I walk into a room and I don't really need to be too close to anyone, that I can get all the photos that I need from a little bit of a distance. It allows people to be a heck of a lot more natural. The other benefit of this lens is that you can hide distracting details in the background. If you walk into a room, say our studio here, it's a little bit embarrassing to show you, but when you move your aperture to something like f1.4, the background really starts to disappear and become very cinematic. And this lens is also fantastic in low light with its f1.4 aperture. Typically when I arrive at a wedding day, this is the lens that will be on my camera until given a reason to change it. Typically that reason is that I walk into a room, maybe it's a little bit smaller than I had in mind and I have to do a group shot of a lot of people. Otherwise, this lens is going to be on my camera. And as I mentioned, this is technically a portrait lens, so it is going to take incredible portraits for you if you find yourself in a space that's what you need to do, which on a wedding day, there is an element of that. Next up, so say you walk into that getting ready space and it is a little bit smaller. It's a smaller hotel room than we were in today. You have to move to something that is a little bit wider. I don't want to go full wide yet. I want to go to this 55mm f1.8 ZA. What this lens does specifically is, one, it makes your kit even smaller. So as you can see, this lens is definitely smaller than the 85. It is also lighter as well. So if you're looking for that very light kit, this might be a good place to start. It's also relatively cost effective as well. So it's a great first lens to get if you are getting into wedding photography. Realistically, you could shoot an entire day on this 55mm lens. It is wide enough in most environments, but it's long enough to get you those portrait images as well. And one thing you'll notice from this lens is the rendering of the image is absolutely beautiful. It is very film-esque. We've shot a lot of film over the past couple of years, and this lens gets you very close to that look and feel. Next up is a lens that is critically important to have in your bag. It is a wide angle lens. This is the 24mm f1.4 G Master, and it is useful for a number of reasons. As I mentioned, you walk into that smaller room, everyone wants a group shot, everybody's getting ready. You have to be able to get that shot for them. If you're on something like the 85, you will find yourself kind of back too far into a corner. When you get to that corner, switch to the 24. The 24mm f1.4 G Master is the smallest in its class, and it is also very minimal on distortion, which means when you're in environments like this with pillars, the photos are gonna come together as you remember them. I shoot this lens as all of these primes pretty much wide open all day, and at f1.4, you can make some really interesting portraits that aren't a typical portrait. You usually see images from a 50 or a 55 or an 85, but you don't typically see portraits with a wide angle lens shot with a shallow depth of field. So I think there's something interesting there, and I've really fallen in love with that. I feel like this 24mm f1.4 G Master also unlocks a little bit of creativity. I love to use it when the couple is coming back down the aisle after they've just been married, and shooting at f1.4 is no problem for all of the Sony cameras. As you can see, the couple is very crisp in focus. And then typically I'll use it for room shots as well, that I'll walk into a room or for an establishing exterior. This will always be the lens that I'm using. The next lens up is the 70-200 f2.8 G Master, and it is my ceremony workhorse. Pretty much any ceremony that's not a destination wedding or a very, very small wedding or elopement, I have shot on a 70-200. I feel that it is very important. You don't really want to interrupt the guest experience. You don't want to be standing in front of the guests. If you can zoom around the scene rather than actually running around with your feet to get the frames that you need, you're going to create a much better guest experience, a better experience for your couples. And with a lens like this, you can definitely hide in the background on the side aisles and get all the photos you need. And with a zoom lens, you can have frames anywhere between 70-200, which means you get a lot of variation very, very quickly. Ceremonies happen very quick, and sometimes people don't come down the aisle you're expecting them to. And if you have a 70-200, you can make sure that you are covered for anything that happens during the ceremony. A lot of people also use this as a main portrait lens, which means it will just basically remain on their camera for most of the day. It can get you the couple's photos, it will get you candids of the entire day, it'll get you those podium shots. It's a very versatile lens and definitely one that should be in your bag. Another benefit of the 70-200 f2.8 G Master is the close focusing distance as well. You can focus pretty close to this lens. And the last lens, the 35mm f1.4 G Master. It is, I would say, my favorite lens for the entire Sony system. This is the first lens that I would put on my camera if I was going out to do a travel shoot, whether it is photos or videos. This is kind of my go-to lens. On a wedding day, it is also incredibly versatile. You can get great room shots, you can get photos of the couples. If you are maybe more on the photojournalism side of wedding photography and you really are interested in getting the most photojournalistic photos possible, I might recommend a 35 as a main lens. The 85 is great. 85 starts to feel a little bit more editorial, whereas the 35 really feels like you're there, like you're in the environment. Shot at f1.4, you get that really nice shallow depth of field, and it's just a very pleasing cinematic image. And then a secret benefit of this 35mm lens is how close it can focus, that this can act as a macro lens, especially on something like the Alpha 7R4, where you have a lot of megapixels to crop in from if needed. You can get away with using this as a macro lens absolutely on a wedding day, which means you don't have to have an additional lens in your bag just for pretty much the ring shots and maybe sometimes the invitations. And this just makes your kit even more versatile. So that's it, that's all. Sony lenses for wedding photography. You should have 2 camera bodies if you're out there on a wedding day, especially if you're a prime shooter. Typically the 85 will be on one camera and either the 24 or 35 will be on my second body. Then during the ceremony, I will switch to the 70-200, and that's typically how my day goes. It is important to come into a wedding day prepared for anything. If you think that you know the lens you're gonna use all day, you're gonna show up and you're gonna end up from the 85 and you're gonna immediately be on the 55 or even wider than that. There have been some ceremonies that I've arrived to that I've been ready to shoot them with the 70-200, and I arrive and the space is just way too small and I have to use the 35 for that wedding. So make sure that you're prepared for any variables on a wedding day by having these lenses. That is all for me here in the studio. I hope our paper roll didn't break. Sounded like it broke. Kind of worried about that.